You're listening to Coming Out and Beyond, LGBTQIA Stories, a podcast that celebrates the wisdom, courage, experience, and joy of individuals in the queer community. Every week, we feature a guest who has a remarkable story to tell about their coming out and the life they've lived beyond. Now here's your host, Anne-Marie Zansel.
I am so happy to introduce today Lora Brown, who is a self-proclaimed hippie, Jew, the owner of a small business, a wife of 15 years to one of the most amazing men she ever met, a mother of an 18-year-old son, a dog mom of 2 rescues at this time, a supporter of women-owned businesses, LGBTQIA+, and Black-owned businesses. She's an active supporter of animal rescue, a volunteer as a district captain for the ASPCA. She grew up in a human rights activist world with several mentors guiding her along her journey. Lora was raised in the 70s and 80s with a lesbian or bisexual mother and a lesbian sister, putting her in the middle of the fight for the rights of the LGBTQIA community at an early age, as well as women's rights. She's a corporate dropout and a proud supporter of full inclusion for LGBTQIA+ folks. Lora loves where her journey has taken her and enjoys being able to be a servant to whom she supports and helps. Being a voice to those who have lost their voice or the innocent that are not sure how to speak up or where to start. Lora helps the women in her own business to find their voices while helping their clients and supporting them. Being able to see the bigger picture and problem solve has been of great assistance to Lora throughout her life. Living each day as a way to improve upon the day before is her journey and hopes for her life. Well, welcome, Lora Brown. It's so nice to have you here.
Nice to have you as well, or be here. I'm so used to my own, I'm sorry, but it's exciting. Being on another podcast and speaking and being able to speak with women and just get to know everybody and build such amazing communities. I'm so excited. So,
Lora, tell us your story. I know it's tell people that they're always like,
No.
I would really like to focus more about, we were talking a little bit beforehand about your mom and your sister growing up in that culture and how that has affected you and guided your life. So,
Absolutely. So I originally come from New York, and I have an older sister who's 8 years older. So we got a big spread between us. And my mother moved us to Colorado after she divorced my dad. And it was a highly abusive relationship. So moving to Colorado, kind of running away, getting out of that norm in the 70s, where women were just kind of barely getting into a certain point where they're allowed to even have a bank account, always being husband with your husband.
And you and I, I mean, you remember this, but people don't like the people who are younger than us. I heard the other day, it wasn't until 1972 that women could get their own mortgages. Like, it's insane. So I know what you're talking about, like the rights that we have, and especially the younger generation take for granted, are fairly new. They're like 50 years old.
Yeah, they really are. And it's amazing.
So it sounds like your mom was pretty brave. So she left this marriage and you all moved to Colorado. So what happened next?
So being in Colorado, where, being a single parent, she started driving the school bus and learned how to drive the buses, which was very new for women as well. And then got hired with the RTD, which is the Colorado transit system. She was in the second class where they hired women. So she was like, well, here we go. We are trendsetters, and this is what's going to happen, and go. So that's what she did. And we were, just kind of navigating through things. And while at RTD, she met this amazing woman that she fell in love with. and was like, I think I'm in love. And I'm like, well, yay, mom, who is it? And she's like, well, you've met her. And I'm like, her. And I was about 6, 7. So I was like, okay. And I had my godmom was a lesbian that came from New York as well. So I was used to, being around lesbian women, and it was not a shock or like a judgment, but it was a shock as far as, well, you were married, and I'm 6, 7, so it's like, what? But she's like,
you didn't realize people could switch teams at that point.
Right. I was like, yeah, we switch. Okay. So it really wasn't much of anything to me. Like, I didn't really think much about it. My mom was very key and adamant about us not growing up in specific areas where we weren't going to learn. She put us into communities with lots of different culture and ideas and open thinking. So she was just very clear on that. So I was like, okay, as I do. I loved Donna and she was amazing. And I was like, yay, Donna, another woman in the family. Like, who cared? I was great with it. Happy. And then about 6 months after that, my sister, who then was almost 15, came out the closet. Okay. And was like, I'm a lesbian. And I was like, oh, okay. Big question to everybody for me was, does that make me one too? Right?
Of course. Or for the women that I work with is, oh, my sister's the lesbian in the family, so I can't be one. You know what I mean? So it's a both and thing. So I'm sure you're considered her sexuality at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and it's funny because the answer that came out was perfect. It was, well, statistically, probably not. But as you get older, we'll figure it out, right? All right. And that's just kind of how.
Did you say that to yourself, Laura, or did your mom say that to you?
My mom said that to me. Yeah.
Oh my God. Like, I can't imagine growing up in the 80s with that kind of support and just like such an acceptance of sexuality and human beings. Like, what a gift your mom gave you. Yeah. I have a quick question. Where were you in Colorado, first of all? Were you in a ranch town or were you like in the city?
We were in the city. When we first moved there, I have an aunt and uncle that lived in Boulder. So we were in Boulder at first, and really with the Jewish community out there. And then my mom moved us to Golden. Okay. Didn't work for us because my mom's idea was, I can't let you grow up in lily-white America thinking that everybody is blonde-haired and blue-eyed. It's irresponsible. So we moved to what's considered East Denver, which was primarily at that time an all-Black community. Wow. So it was very interesting. And I was like, okay. But my Donna was Black. My godmother was also a Black woman. So it was those things where in the responsibility of growing up with culture and around different people and learning, that was all part of it. Being in the lesbian and gay community, being in the Black community, knowing we were Jewish and that we weren't white, that we were Jewish and we were going to face anti-Semitism and women's rights problems and stuff like that. So she was very clear on putting us strategically in places where we could grow.
School, what was that like for you with two lesbian moms and your mom being an interracial relationship? I mean, so my first fiance was an African-American man, and it was about that same time. It was really hard in Connecticut to be dating a Black guy.
Yeah.
So I remember that. I mean, I'm about 10 years older than you, but I remember that, like, it was really super hard. So I'm curious, like, what was that like for you going to school with all those intersections?
What's interesting is it wasn't that big of a challenge for me. I was extremely comfortable in that community and in all of those communities. I was just comfortable. I was me. I was this goofy, annoying, oh my God, child who I was the child I was I was the child my grandmother wished on my mother. So I was just one of those high kids that my mother was just like, I love her. But being in those communities, they were villages. So she wasn't alone. Even though as a single parent trying to maneuver all of this, I wasn't faced with it so much because we were all now so different around us. We all had our theme, and we're all dealing with all of the rights of the world and things that were happening, and discrimination and judgment and all of that. So we kind of were a community that could face it together. And it was very interesting. And even in the Black community, where certain things, as time went on, things became very highly judgmental. Back in that time, I didn't see that. People were super open. They were always excited. They loved my mom. They loved Donna. They loved Pandora, my sister. Like, nobody had any real quandaries, except for a couple of friends' parents who were big, church going
people, yeah,
straightforward people.
I have to ask you, your mom must have been a hippie, because with your sister's name being Pandora, that was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, we are a true hippie family. Like, we were just pretty natural. Even now, when after I left corporate, even before I left corporate, I went all natural. Like, my hair is in color and I don't wear makeup. I don't bother. And if it's uncomfortable to wear, I refuse. So
have you done the girl braless revolution? You know how people are going braless.
My mother burned her bra in the 60s. I didn't start wearing one until I was about 16. And then over COVID and leaving corporate, I was like, peace. I haven't had one. So I'm a free bird.
Well, the lovely thing about being shot from this way up, I just make sure that, I'm presentable.
Right.
So you grew up in this incredible, you need to write a book. Has anyone ever told you that? You really need to write a book, because what a blessing. So how your mother identified is so much of the values I hold as well. And I admire what she did, because she took you out of a lily white town and said, hey girls, this place, the world isn't like that. And it was so incredibly intentional, and also super, people use woke as such a slur, but it's not. She was definitely someone who was really ahead of her time. She was a trailblazer.
Yeah, absolutely. And we got lucky with that, the understanding of not having to fit in and not having to be or act a certain way, or think that the world was closed off, and not learning. Like, as a Jewish kid, I went to church because my babysitter went to church 4 days a week. I sang in church choir. I went on church choir tours. And they knew who I was. They knew who my mother was. It wasn't always real accepted, but I was always the one that was like, yeah, but what you're teaching in church isn't what I believe anyway. Like, I'm here because I'm kind of required to be. But I enjoyed it, being around people, but I was also the educator. So I'm like, oh, you were taught this. Great. Where did you read that? Where did that come from? And so I always asked way too many questions for pastors in church. And they'd be like, oh, Lora, you're cute. Why don't you go over there and go hang out and let the adults, be around? Fine, whatever. But knowing I was open and free to do what I wanted, my mother was like, learn. So, I've been to mosque, I've been to synagogue, I've been to Buddhist temple, I've been in churches. I happen now to be more just in general, I'm a spiritual person. I have very little to do with religion. The Judaism is a culture.
Yes,
and I
culturally Jewish. Yeah.
Birth lines, bloodlines, but I'm super open, and I'm more into the divine, spiritual health, intuition, empath. That's where my journey has led me. So we're free to decide. And my mother was very clear about that. We can teach you whatever, and wherever you go, you go. So.
Well, It is, it really is absolutely amazing you grew up in an environment like that. And while you have been talking, I'm like, I'm going to do 4 episodes for Pride Month, and you will be definitely featured as one of them, because you are, you're of a pretty outspoken generation, especially with a lot of the lesbians that came out during that time. They were often members of NOW. They were often referred to as, like, now, Betty Friedan called them the Lavender Menace, because they were doing so much work within NOW, and it was a very white hetero organization at that point, and they were, so not all the women in there, but like they didn't, lesbians were fighting for the right for people to choose abortion when when they didn't need that right, if they're in a purely a lesbian relationship, and some of the women within the NOW organization didn't care about their rights. And so it's not all, absolutely not all. And I'm not saying all, but some women didn't care. So it's really interesting, the history of the lesbian culture. So what happened next? You grow up in this very inclusive, very diverse home, and and then you go to corporate America, which makes me laugh, but talk about a white place.
Yeah. Once I figured out growing up, it just turned out that I happened to be the straight one in the family.
Mhm.
And so now I'm dating, and I happen to date Black men.
Mhm.
So I
Makes
grew
a
up
lot
in
of
the Black
sense.
community, and made a whole lot of sense to me. But having to explain to them, like, so I'm just going to let you know, if you got any problems with this, I'm not the one you want to talk to, because lesbian mother, lesbian sister, I was raised around all women. I'm a very strong, outspoken, independent, very mouthy woman. Just know that about me. And if that scares you at all,
I'm sure some of the guys love that.
Right. The idea of it, like, oh, all woman family, until you get there and you realize that is the only man around a lot of times. It could be an uneasy place to be,
I think a lot of men need that.
I do too. Yeah.
So where did you go to college, Laura?
I did a little stint at Aurora Community College in Colorado. But from the time I was 18, I started working with teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
And I was there for 13 years working in case management for juvenile court, residential facilities. I spent quite a few years working with teenage sex offenders.
Mm-hmm.
So I was more in that community again of just kind of being servant, teaching, learning,
Mm-hmm.
and then I got burned out.
Of course. Social service work is really hard. Yeah. Yeah. And also seeing all I can imagine seeing, hurt people. So those kids that committed those crimes, I'm sure the majority of them came from very abusive environments. And so seeing all that all the time takes a toll. I understand that, because I have been working with people that have been in grief, transition, and loss now for 15 years, and I'm pivoting my business to working with people who want to create businesses. And so I'm looking forward to creation and joy and excitement, because I just can't do the loss, sadness, and grief anymore. I just can't. And I've moved, I don't know if you know this, maybe you saw this with your mom and your sister, is that as you become more and more comfortable being a queer person, you become more and more outspoken, and you become like, my wife and I were in the gallery with the Tennessee Three, and I got a nice picture with Justin Pearson, and we did some advocacy work then, because it was ridiculous what happened in Tennessee. So, and I have found, as I have become more, like, I have moved through, just coming out at 50 to being where I am now, is like, I am like such a, like, I don't care anymore. You want to hate me? Go ahead. I'm going to do this work.
Yeah.
So
I'm here for.
yeah. So you left this type of advocacy. Now, your ASPCA work, tell me about that.
So on top of all of this, my love and joy is animals. If you ask me, could I live without people? 100%, as long as I don't have to live without animals. Like, I am definitely an animal person. I was the little kid that stuck their hands in fences and cars and all that stuff to, ooh, puppy, had no care in the world when it came to animals. So the older I've got, I've even been known to jump out of a few moving cars on a stray dog on the street.
This sounds so much like my wife. She went under a car on a highway to get a kitten.
Oh, bless her. Yeah.
And she was going to try to fall, and then she never gave. She kept it for a while. She's like, I'm going to give this away. I don't need another cat. Her ex-partner and her had, I think, 6 animals, like four dogs and 2 cats. They were really huge animal lovers. So I understand that. Yeah. So you were that little girl climbing underneath the car to get the kitten.
Yeah. And I turned out to be allergic to animals. So I did spend several years not being able to keep them. Like, I'd find them a stray, find them a home, do whatever, but I couldn't keep them. And then I started, when I was finally on my own and really on my own, I got a dog and then got more. And then my husband finally was like, look, we hit our limit. We're not doing this. I'm not going to have the animal farm. I love you. But so he's kept a close rein on me when it comes to that. He's like, we'll find them homes and stuff like that. But the ASPCA does, each state has their own like district captains put into it to advocate, to lobby, and to call the senators and to call the government and to help with the laws that are coming through, like push them. Are you going to do this? Let's have these conversations and do that lobbying piece for the laws. And then the enforcement, like, we passed this law, why is nobody enforcing it? And because I'm just so adamant about the treatment of animals, I rehabbed pit bulls when they were all being banned and all that stuff. So there's a lot of that. I've always liked the big scary dog, right? German Shepherds, Dobies, pit bulls. I love them. They're like my heart. So being able to do that kind of volunteering, the older I get, because chasing animals down streets and into ditches is not as suitable long-term for me. It was the way of me being able to still be able to be a part of all that and love animals, but do it in a way that wasn't quite so dangerous anymore. And really be able to give on a broader scale. So I do have meetings with our senators and our governor and our mayor and that kind of thing. And I don't know how keen they are on me, but whatever.
Yeah. So you obviously left a very difficult job, is when, you said in 2009. So then did you go to corporate America?
I did, yes. Yeah. And spent 15 years. Because it was right before, it was in 2006. So I was like, I'll do a couple years, get past the burnout and go back, right? Mm-hmm. And then the recession hit and nobody was leaving their jobs. Like, there wasn't even a hint that you might leave your job in any way. So I settled into corporate and then settled into developing teams in different departments to handle escalated problem-solving teams. So I was like, I'm right back in the nitty-gritty of, is this fun? Is this not fun? This isn't fun. Because I swore our company was the crappiest company. It's all I heard all day. And I was there for 12 years and just kept doing it like I'm there. And then finally one day I was like, no, we had some management changes. The manager I'd been under for such a long time, whom I loved and was a great leader, he was leaving. Who they were putting in charge was not so great. We didn't mesh well. And I literally had an argument with that person and then went into my higher executive's office and looked at him and said, I quit before I catch a case. I don't have enough bail money for what's about to happen. And he was like, what? I'm so serious. I don't have enough bail money. I would take the charge if I had enough bail money right now. So I'm dangerous. I'm not okay. I'm absolutely dangerous to myself and others right now. So
Was
I
this
gotta go.
pre-COVID or post-COVID?
Pre-COVID.
Okay.
I was in
All right.
18, in
So
28.
were you doing advocacy work at that time? Because you said you've been really active in advocacy this entire time. And so a lot of times, people think that sometimes people, it's like a full-time job, but a lot of times it's something you do part-time, or like it's a volunteer activity. So you were advocating for your puppies and animals and stuff like that. What other advocacy work were you doing?
I was still doing a lot of work with kids. Plus, I then also had my son who was in sports. My husband coached with friends that were coaching. He had teams. And so I got a lot more involved in his life because he played everything, baseball, basketball, football. Like he was in it. And my days were like corporate, run home, practice, eat, get up, repeat.
I understand, yes. Mm-hmm.
I was like, when did I become soccer mom? Because that was not the life I lived, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But on top of that, it was, dealing with helping with animal rescues and helping with, writing letters and doing stuff when it came to the children, because I still had my heart, I'm not a fan of teenagers, but I still have my heart there. Part of being on burnout was I don't really like them and I'm getting ready to have one, so I had to get to a point where I was okay with teenagers again.
Mm-hmm.
But it was definitely, being involved in that. And I did obviously a lot less than I was before.
Of course, yeah. We get busy with other things. Yeah. So your mom, we talked before we got on. What year did she pass away?
2010.
So the care of your mom had ended at that point and stuff like that. Yeah. When we were talking before we started recording, you said you came from a really long line of activists, your mother, your grandmother, and your great grandmother. And can you talk about that a little bit? Like, it's almost like feminism is in your blood.
Probably.
It's almost like, I bet your genetics have completely changed. Is your son a feminist?
Not so much. He definitely, he women's rights. He understands that, we are equal. This is what is. And he grew up with me just,
of course, yeah.
And he supports it as much. My son and my husband, a lot of times are more focused on the Black community with what's happened.
Mm-hmm.
But he did come to me a few years ago when the people that were run over during where'd my brain go? A protest. Thank you. Where the two people were run over, and what he recognizes that the signs were talking about Jews. And he was like, well, what's that about? He said, because the issue was in the Black community. And I was like, oh, son, I'm sorry. But the only group hated probably more than Black people in this moment right now are Jews. And he's like, well, why do they hate, Jews? What happened? So I was like, I'm still not ever very clear on why. I'm not clear. Clearly, it's something where, the realization that it's a bloodline. We're not white people and that we are a different bloodline. In other countries, we're Middle Eastern. So it just, who knows? I said, I've had Christians say things to me off the wall, and I'm just like, oh, okay.
Well, I would say that it is directly related to Christianity, and which is so unbelievably sad, because Christianity sprung out of Judaism. I mean, Jesus was Jewish.
Yeah.
And it, I went to Yale Divinity School, and so I would say that some of the scriptures especially when you read the Gospel of John, they talk about the Jews, the Jews, the Jews. And then, of course, when the Crusades happened and all those things. And what I find, Laura, is that societies are always looking for a scapegoat.
Oh, yeah.
And now I would say more hated than this is not a pissing contest, but like trans folks right now are, being the scapegoat for so many things. And it's like such a propaganda playbook page, distract from what the real problems are, and let us hate others that are not the same as us. And so it's just incredibly sad, and it's been going on forever. And I wish we would learn. Simply, I wish we would learn. So tell me about those grandmoms.
So my granny was a jazz pianist and she taught piano. So when my mother was young, she'd be in the jazz clubs in New York. And then so my mother and her older sister would.
But that was just that was so like women were not jazz pianists then.
And, from Rochester, New York, the little Jewish lady hanging out, and she's down in the jazz clubs where back then were all Black clubs, and with her two daughters and bright red curly hair, and them hanging out behind the bar with all these kids. And that were, part of the club, because all the employees would bring their kids in too, it's kind of how life went back then. And that was really how my granny kind of introduced all that in, because it was, who cares? Like we're all mixing it up together. Nobody cared. In New York City, no one really gave a crap at all. They were so into their own. It's like, whatever, live your life, go about your business, your day, who cares? And so it was really just that. And, my grandmother, apparently my grandmother before my granny's mother was kind of the same way. It was, let people live their lives. If it doesn't directly affect, if you're not killing someone in my family, or you're not harming or taking rights away from someone in my family, you live yours. I have zero to do with that, because you're not harming anyone, living your own life. And that really was just what it was. And in the Jewish community, that's really what is taught. It's love and charity and living. We all have our own journey. And there's rules and bylaws and things. If you're Orthodox, they live a much different life than we live.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm like, yeah, not all Jewish people. When we go towards the Reform Jews and maybe some conservative Jewish. No, because I've worked with women who've come out later in life from the Orthodox Jewish community, and it's pretty darn hard. You live your life a certain way. So like it sounds like rebellion and respect for human beings and respect for people to live their lives. You will fight for them to have the rights for them to live their lives in the most best way, but you ain't getting involved if it doesn't infringe on other people's rights. Yeah, right. I think I'm that, like, and it's so funny too, because for years, even when I was living my straight life, I always felt that way. I was like, why do you, like, I remember, maybe because I was a closeted lesbian, but I was like, why do you care so much? Like, this is none of your business. If somebody wants to, like, and now having lived a straight life and now I'm married to a woman, like, I can really tell the difference, and I can feel the discrimination, and I can feel the judgment. And I think, like, my wife, who's always been out, she's like so used to it, she doesn't notice it, like it's not part of her, but I can tell the difference, right? And I'm like, seriously, you're gonna be left. Like it's a mixture of anger and laughter.
Right.
You're going to treat me differently because who I spend my life with, like,
Yeah.
like who I go home with and sleep with at night. Like, are you really? And like, I'm really incredulous,
Yeah.
right? You know?
Yeah. We were
Yeah.
like,
It's
why?
like being married to someone who's African American. You really? You're going to treat me differently because I'm married to someone who's of a different race than me? Big deal. Like go live your life. Don't worry about us.
Mhm.
We should start an organization, Laura, called Go Live Your Life.
All of your life. Like, and I explain to people all the time, like the stuff with abortion that came up, like, we weren't allowed wire hangers in our house. I mean, that's how anti this whole situation my mother was. She was like, abortion rights are right. You don't get to tell me I'm a woman, back off, especially when it comes to men. Like it was just very adamant. She goes, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to argue with a man about this. And I'm not really going to argue with a woman about this. Like that was her stance on things. So we grew up knowing that we needed abortion rights, whether or not we believed in it or didn't
We
believe it.
choose for it for ourselves, right?
Yeah. And then I was met with that at 15 years old when I was pregnant, and my mom was like, oh, hell no.
Mm-hmm.
She made the appointment, she went in, and and that was done. And she actually also had an abortion when she was my age. She was 16. So back in the 50s, so
very hard to do.
Right. And then we found out my granny actually had one too.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, that's that idea of we don't necessarily, and it's not birth control. It's not, we're just going to keep doing this or doing that. I wouldn't go through that again, ever. I still it's very clear in my mind still at my age. But the idea that the choice was there, because at 15, I was not prepared nor ready, and my mother was not raising
another child.
She wasn't gonna do it, and she was very clear on that. So those kinds of things, and it was great that it was in place since we did need it. But even if I'd never needed it, it would definitely be in place, because it's that I don't have to agree. I do have to agree. Either way, I just need to support it. Because as we start to take things away, we don't understand what keeps getting chipped away from our rights and what it took to get to where we are. I literally remember my mother crying in a bank because they wouldn't let her open a bank account. Where's your husband? Where's your husband? That's all they could say to her. And my mom was in tears because she's like, I need to be able to open a bank account. And they're just like, well, you need your husband. And I just was so confused watching that. Like, what does my dad have to do? He's not here. Like, he can't, So it was just always so confusing. So the idea of us turning back the time on what it took so long to fight for, and to fight in, and then that same thing where we fought for all these rights in the LGBTQ community, and we were there, and we've been on the front lines, and we're fighting, they get the rights, and then all of a sudden here we are reversing, slowly chipping back away, where you're going to be hiding in closets. My mom and Donna were best friends for a very long time. That was what it was, because Donna wasn't out to her family. Even though Donna was always a lesbian, but she wasn't out like that. So for a very long time, it was the best friends. They were just very close friends.
Everybody knew.
Right.
It just wasn't, it was like, that's very, people just didn't talk about it, like, I mean, come on,
right.
two best friend women don't live together in the same house and raise children together. They just don't. I'll have to tell you something afterwards.
Okay.
You know what, Laura, it was amazing having you on this show. I'm really grateful for sharing the story of your mother and growing up with such a fierce feminist. And it really you can tell she did a great job. And it was wonderful truly wonderful to hear your story. And I'm really excited to share it because so many of my people that I work with worry about the effect of their being a lesbian on their children. And I'm always like, your kids are going to be fine. I always say that. I find that if somebody comes out and their child is like less than 9 or less, they often, like, the kids just don't care. It's so quickly with the divorce and with, oftentimes the women I work with have to get divorced. And so, especially with the coming out, because it quickly becomes the kid's normal. And it's so simple, like, are you going to have a boyfriend again, mommy? No, I think I might date girls this time. It's
really that simple.
It's that simple. It's not this big coming out to your kid. The older kids do have a little bit of a harder time. But I really do appreciate how much you shared about like how your mother, I think, and, being raised in such an open environment really influenced you in such a positive way in your life. And I love how you describe your business. And I'm going to try to get you to come on my other podcast and we'll hook these two together so people can hear both stories. So
absolutely.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really, really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I loved it. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
You've been listening to Coming Out and Beyond, LGBTQIA+ stories with Anne-Marie Zanzel. New episodes of the Coming Out and Beyond podcast drop every other Friday. You can tune in at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and at annemariezanzel.com. Be sure to hit subscribe when tuning in so you never miss an episode. And for more resources, articles, videos, and a free downloadable guide for coming out later in life, visit annemariezanzel.com.